attention, so if we hold the claim that attention has shifted from the customer to the self implicitly, Nietzsche said, invisible threads are the strongest ties. So if attention has shifted from the customer to the self, to the individuals within organization, those that are organizing. What if start with why from all those years ago, almost, what is it, 20 years? It's adoption, it's acceptance in the marketplace. It's the mere fact that something so simple, so obvious was accepted and transmitted at global scale from an impassioned orator. The fact that that occurred, was accepted and transmitted, reflects this invisible architecture, this invisible shift, this shift from implicit attention on customer as it relates to organization, business, to self, to each individual, to the people. So if attention is shifted from the customer to the self, how must leaders, how must management design design the organizational system, um, so that organizations, don't get lost or undermined unintentionally due to the societal, social, macro cultural shifts, right? Or the tectonic plates of macro culture shifting, and the unseen or unseen, unattentive shifts in focus from implicit customer orientation to explicit employee proclamation. It's not to say that the attention on the employee, the attention on the people is not important. It's not something to pay attention to. It is, of course. It's something that explicitly would need to pay attention to if implicitly the attention is implicit, uh, implicitly on the customer higher than the team. Meaning, if the team member, if their attention is, if they're what they value in the list, top to bottom, if their top value is customer, then who's watching them? Well, then the organization watches them. If their top value is themselves, then the organization watching them, know who's watching the customer. If the employee's top value is the customer and the organization is not them, but itself, then that those team members ultimately will become disenfranchised by their job, their career, their organization. It will have negative long-term effects if if they're not supported in their attention on the customer. If now the attention now the where the conflict arises, the inevitable the the function of the organization breaks down inherently is because it's battling multiple forces of attention. And the organization has to influence the attention on the customer. Well, and how does it actually go about doing that? It goes about doing that by transmitting the value, what it values through how those in positions of authority and that signal the meaning of the organization and how they behave. Like that's a piece of it. It's also what they talk about and what the conversations look like. This is where, and this is where stories come into play. If an organization is focused on the customer in the conversations, and they're putting themselves, it's putting itself in the customer's position and thinking about what's in the best interest of the customer, and its capital is reflecting that attention. It's simultaneously thinking what's in the best interest of the team, and its capital is reflecting that attention. And it has to do both at the same time, which creates a friction, while at the same time protecting itself from oblivion and paying attention to its own identity, which becomes the culture, right? The identity of the organization is the culture, which is opaque and ubiquitous. Um, there are multiple variables to the culture conversation, stories, the language that's spoken, not just the language like in a society, but the nuanced language of the organization and accurate how accurate that language, that nuanced language that is spoken within that organization matches up to reality perceived by the people. So like example would be if one of the values um if one of the values is uh ownership, and it's we something, you know we see it, we own it. So, and that means within that organization something simple like ownership. And that means like, colon, we see it, we own it. If someone sees something maybe just slightly beyond their responsibility, like their job responsibility, they see it out of whack, they'll fix it. And there's like an that works within that organization because everyone agrees with it and respects a little bit uh, what overlap in boundaries. I just as an example, if people actually do it. So, for example, if I go to the bathroom and I'm a team member, and I see in the bathroom that there's no toilet paper in the stall next to mine. While I'm going to the bathroom, my own personal journey towards alleviating buildup of human excrement, but I see in the stall next to me the toilet paper's empty. I see it, I own it. I don't have to put the toilet paper from the closet in there, but within this culture, if I do that, someone else that really had to go isn't going to sit down and then not realize there's not toilet paper. That could throw off their day, a meeting. Who knows the untold consequences of that example of me seeing something and not owning it. So the value of the values in that case is the the clarity and possibility of someone owning something, being personally responsible for that behavior. But computer froze. I really loathe doing this on my computer versus in the studio. So in that example that we ownership, we see it, we own it. Someone goes to the bathroom and they recognize that, how they would recognize that there's no toilet paper in the other stall. That makes the analogy a little bit more difficult. I mean, maybe something is like, okay, papers run out in when you go in to wash your hands, there's not enough paper, or so, okay, you obviously see that people aren't just looking at every stall. That would be another level of ownership, almost like taken too far. So maybe that's a good that I shared that example. So like taken too far, it's like every time you go to the bathroom, you're looking at every stall. I mean, hey, there may be a ton of value depending on the season of the organization for that level of attention and detail of each individual in the organization, regardless if they're the CEO or a brand new intern. We see it, we own it. And like that's a way to transmute values. But another example would be if, the paper ran out, or if you see, oftentimes you go to like an airport or somewhere and there's just paper all over the floor, and there's hundreds of people walking out of there and it hasn't been cleaned up and it really looks like a mess. It's like we see it, we own it. People, if that was like if that was like a societal value, when we're at airports, everyone is just cleaning up, and like now there's no messes at airports. So, and all the responsibility to clean up that bathroom doesn't fall on the airport. So that's the power of language and context, which comes from clarity. And then the reason I brought this up was if the language is clear and the clarity is there, and it matches a description of reality, meaning if people do that enough, if people we see it, we own it. If people live that out enough, other people will live that out. And one of the reasons I think they say it starts at the top is because of the power of modeling, the power of copycatting. If people above others in the hierarchy of in the hierarchy of the organization do things that signal that reflect responsibilities far below their authority, it it impels it. So like if the CEO is picking up if the CEO is picking up the 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 paper towels on the floor, people are more likely below them in the hierarchy to do it. However, there's other variables that would have to be in play for that to actually happen, because if the people compete that the relationship of the person, the employee to the organization could break down to such a degree where them seeing that wouldn't lead to modeling that behavior. There's other variables in play that have to do with trust. Trust as in de dependability, not necessarily agreeing with everything that or believing the exact same things that the organization. Well, this is where society is evolving. This is the whole point of this conversation. As people's personal identities become more and more higher value in society, more and more pressure of the organization's resources fall under scrutiny or come into necessity, meaning more and more responsibility falls on an organization, on management, on those that are in positions of authority through title and rank and role. More responsibility falls on those people to not only model the core values, things that are expected of them, but transmit them through story and language. And that's where culture becomes a leading indicator because more and more responsibility falls on an organization to inspire the people and actually move them into action as personal identity becomes higher and higher of a value on an individual level and also makes talent more and more valuable to organizations. Talent, as in those that aren't just capable of working, but are willing to work and willing to invest their time and their personal resources in organization, in management. That pool, and if in theory that pool is shrinking more and more, it's shrinking more and more responsibilities falling on organizations to to influence the people to pay attention to the customers. That's creating a very interesting friction on entrepreneurs, on the entrepreneur class, and it could potentially result in a lot more executive management dominating the private markets, and that would make sense based on the the capital markets moving more and more private, more and more professional management moving into smaller and smaller organizations. This is why I think the liberal arts education actually becomes more valuable to entrepreneurs in today than ever because the more entrepreneurs become there's a they have what was implicit and in lived behavior has become explicit more sooner, spoken sooner, the values more clear sooner and talked about and lived out because the organizations are fulfilling a part of personal identity that society is filling less of, that technologies like social platforms, like AI, like just everything that gives individuals more a greater self concept than their self-worth, if because their self-worth is a combination of everything in their life, even what they are not aware of, how long they've been in business, what they've actually understood, which takes time is like the more ups and downs human beings weather in their lives, it those conditions influence the balance of individualism and of yeah, if there's an extreme of like radical individualism and balanced group cohesion. If like you can go on one extreme where it's a crowd and now there's no individuals, it's just a mass. That's like the crowd effect on one extreme. And then another extreme would be the radical individual that is they also lack of self. They are not they're not an individual, although they're not in the group a crowd. They're everything and nothing. That's one extreme, an absolute or like a rel. It's almost like an infinite relativism or a sub an infinite regression of subjective personas or hard to I'm not quite clear on how to say that. I have to write more, think about that. To the individuals lost in the crowd that's in groupthink. So those are two extremes where there's no self as a concept of absolute individualism where there is just an infinite possibility of self versus too much groupthink. Okay, yeah, this is the extreme I want to. This is the and an organization swings and pendulums can easily swing in pendulums of based on this. Like example, an organization where they have too much more to lose and less to gain, they're in empire building, could fall into groupthink where the individuals are not innovating anymore. They're not thinking for themselves. They're not thinking they're not empathizing and thinking on behalf of the customers, transmitting new information on products and services to the top of the organization where there's ultimate executive decision rights. My computer is loading. I'm simultaneously downloading what I'm saying so I can revisit it later and think more about it and write through it and filter the thoughts and because I don't know necessarily where I'm going. I'm posing a question and trying to elucidate on it and explore through it. And this process is being a bit buggy because of lag. So I'm going to have to come up with a new solution. And interestingly enough, it could be a good metaphor for this because I'm right here. Yeah, here we go. To that point, I am right here in real time. I see what's going on. I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to what's going on, and there is a problem. There's an obstacle in lag, which is altering the product of this experience, in my view, for whomever's listening to it. So back to that extreme example, if yeah, the breakdown of that metaphor was that the organization is too much to and because I'm right here, I can do something quickly about it. I could talk about it, transmit, hey, this is what's going on. This is why I'm slowing down so much. And like at least maybe you'll give me another chance, like keep listening, and then I can go later and do something about this. I've complained about it yesterday, so it's like two strikes, you're almost out here. Three strikes, you're out. I can do something quickly because there's not too many layers of communication in between me and this process. I'm doing the process myself. I'm in the face of the customer experience. So going back to that, the bureaucracy, the organization suffering from bureaucracy, it's so big that it has much more to lose and much less to gain. So it's going to take less. That impacts risk, and it's that impacts information flow. It has too much to lose and too little to gain. It will naturally listen to the lowest common denominator on a less openness. It will take more energy for information at the bottom of the organization to get to the top, inherently as a consequence of the organization as an actual self, as an identity, as a culture, uh, uh, operating reactively to survive, because it takes it's naturally it's getting less to risk more. It's risk. It would take it is a higher risk and a lower return based on its size. And what that does is part of the role of leadership is to regulate that process and to be present and paying attention and on it and not fall in or succumb to the power that comes from position and lose the sense of self, the hero's journey of the team members, the customer journey of their satisfaction of what they want, what they need, and but that naturally that process breaks down as an organization grows because information it takes more and more energy to go from the bottom to the top, and it can't all fall on the people because they're not powerful enough. They don't have enough information. That this is what big organizations splinter off their competitors naturally in the system. I think this is Schumpeter's theory of creative destruction at some level is like and I haven't mastered his work. I barely read it. I just someone, people have mentioned a couple times the theory of creative destruction. I've been thinking about that for years. I mean, it seems rather obvious that these larger, yeah, the so that's one extreme is where the organization has grown to such a degree that its breadth, its size un disincentivizes disincentivizes new ideas to flow through the system as a consequence of its size and scope. So there's powerful forces challenging the personal responsibility of those in positions of leadership that have to regulate the system, which is a very stressful, difficult, competitive, job. And it's one of those things that just because someone wants it doesn't mean that they're ready for it. On the other extreme, and this is where I was going with that, is that individuals they lose their I they lose their identity, their alignment with the future selves of who they could be as a job, as a career, as a person working with an organization that stifles the new ideas. They lose that spirit, that connection to the future for themselves. And so they become disenfranchised and disengaged. And part of the organization's role is to figure out who is and why and train them up or help them out so that because even in a sense almost things are inevitable. It's like it's almost to think go back to the perfect system that doesn't exist at this juncture in our I think having being open and accepting of that assumption that it doesn't exist and we'll do our best and it's like how people leave matters because that will end up putting more positive energy in the system as they're navigating their careers, which leads back to other future talent saying let me give that organization a shot because it matters how they leave because that ends up indirectly bringing more energy back to the system. That takes a certain value set to do so and different unconscious stories operating through the system. And in the new era, making those stories conscious and thinking through these conversations in the public forum will be not only like an advantage, but almost like a baseline of how to actually lead and develop business in the future. So the one extreme is individualism gets undermined and destroyed from the crowd or like the growth. On the other side, when it's very small, individualism, it's interesting. The individuals adopt the persona, adopt the ideology of the spirit of the founder. They do. And they do without realizing they've done it. And it's everyone's everyone's aligned, everyone's congruent. It's like the yes people come before the necessity of the no people. When an organization is very large and it's too much, I totally lost it, but it's there's too much individuality, then it fragments to such a degree that people aren't rowing in the same direction. And one of the central themes in the in the books are that as are that the attention of the team members, the attention of the team members is unconsciously being pulled and pulled away from the customer journey, and that's putting an undue amount of responsibility on the organization to influence and inspire the people. And the way that that will be reflected is through providing them a lot more capital incentives when it isn't just the capital incentives that they are going to want. The people aren't even going to know what they want. Because people don't know what they want. Where there's so much of who we are as people is taken for granted within the fabrics of our societies. As those societies shift and fragment, so much of so much conflict will occur in the organizations. The larger the organizations are, the more and more difficult it's going to be for them to compete against the smaller organizations. But also at the same time, the smaller organizations are going to change in their capital structures potentially, and the entrepreneurs as we know them will change. And so the question becomes, what does that mean for capitalism? What does that mean for how business is done in the next generation? That's very intriguing to me. What is the minimum structure required to keep attention outward without killing the individual? I think number one is simple as a conversation about a lot more conversation of like why we exist, what we do, and why is it important, and the rituals that are necessary for that. We're going to see a lot more companies that are lighter on internal staff, higher incentivized differently in pay by orders of magnitude. I think we're going to see a lot more 1099 or like small business collaborating. The like org charts are going to look completely different than they do today. A lot leaner for small business, and private equity firms may take on a much larger role in society I than they already do. And you could, who knows how that's going to change the landscape of everything. The minimum the minimum structure required to keep attention outward without killing the individual. The individual may not be salvageable in the way that would classically be defined as salvageable. And it may not be necessary or even the goal. It's like customer focus fails when the customer is invisible. And what makes it visible is the alignment of words, thoughts, and actions. So talking about the customer and action and living it out. You bring customers' pain, problems into meetings, into this where stories will for some time organizations that understood their stories of the past and were good at articulating them to the people and hiring people that fit from a value standpoint, like personal quality standpoint, skills, and they had internal training programs that were were led by impassioned teachers that believed in the organization, that had played a role in the organizations from time. The tenure transmitted values and time on the road of the apprentice master. But time like apprentice master relationship inherently is becoming is falling apart. So attention on actually how to create the mentor mentee relationship in organizations is going to become exceedingly important to pay attention to. An intentional time of gathering where investment is made on that organizations gather and how they gather in ways that create where people feel like they're a part of it intellectually and emotionally and at the same time are told to believe in the organization not so that they feel like they have to believe, but that they actually do. And that's done through the hiring, the training, and the it's a grouping of all these things. The hiring, the training, and the storytelling of the organization. Storytelling becomes more and more and more important. That being said, it doesn't replace or counterbalance a lack of those stories being lived out in real time by actual management. And manage that creates a lot of pressure where those that don't have to work like they once did have to work like they once did more and harder than ever because the generation coming up doesn't even know what to expect, or what they expect is not going to get them what they think they deserve based on their awareness and their education. It's a complete paradigm shift from a value standpoint, generationally, that is increasing turnover. Is that it's almost like the nomadic employer employee relationship where talent is moving around so quickly and not staying, or when they're there they all have a side hustle, and every side hustle is like an organization that's taken on another business that's taking its attention away from its main customer, and eventually shareholders pay for it. If every employee has a side hustle, then they're inherently stifling the profits that would go to the organization that would be reinvested back into their career. It's like it's fragmenting the culture of the organization to the point where the organization becomes more reactive and worrying about itself and less worried about the employee, and the employee becomes even less worried about the organization and even less worried about the customer, and the customer has more and more options and more choice. I mean, this is just leading to an absolute deconstruction of the organization. It's been happening for years, and it's gonna like happen all at once. And so many giant organizations are going to go out of business, potentially go out of business. I'm not. How could that affect the financial markets? Oh my God, that would be unbelievable. Because, and then a smaller and smaller percentage of them might actually we might see a hell of a lot more M&A going on, and these organizations have had huge capital pools be operate more like holding companies that just buy more and more smaller organizations. So from a standpoint of like the young talent coming out of school, having the ability to start a business and being able to sell it to an organization, there might be a hyper growth in small businesses getting acquired by large organizations that are just have no choice but to take risks on these small businesses because of how they're moving to as capital institutions versus organizations that provide fulfillment of products and services. The whole landscape's changing. Um, Identity must be earned through contribution. Modern culture overvalidates identity without tying it to output. Strong cultures, who you are equals what you reliably contribute, but the organization's projection of what you'll contribute, it's in a battle with your attention on your side hustle or your other thing if you're the employee, and you can't blame the employee for doing that in a society that is changing this rapidly. So how do you meet them where they are and get their attention and get them to focus? You might not be able to. So what does that mean? It could mean much leaner teams and much higher pay for people that are focused on just that organization. That's what it could mean. It could be, and where does that pay come from? It could come from the private markets getting more and more entrenched in organizations. That changes the whole financial landscape of society. And how does that impact people's retirements and all those things? I don't know. But even those organizations are selling to private institutions. So how are they going to adapt? You might see more and more private or investments, and you might see more and more regulation change to where more and more of the everyday people can get involved in those. It's the new baseline. So we have to make customers real, not abstract. That takes metrics, meetings. It's like old ideas become new again when society moves in these types of pendulums. When there's such pressure on the system, old ideas become new ideas again. So that's where like a lot of what I'm doing is bringing old ideas back to life. And it's funny, you think about some of the recent thought leaders in the world on both sides of the political spectrum. There have been people that have just, in an artful way, brought old ideas back to the foray because that's what happens when societies are in flux. So okay, attention has to be designed, not assumed, in this age, and that's why culture is a leading indicator. And as abstract as all of this might seem right now, it's not nearly as complex as it sounds. It's more of just getting used to thinking things interdisciplinary. Plenty of people can do that, especially the people that are leading organizations. Plenty of people that can do that, but to be willing to do that, get used to it. So it's a new language of business. But attention is designed, not assumed. So it has to be designed. And my take is that it's story, language, symbolism, rituals, and hero is a simplification of the puzzle of culture. And leaders must engineer attention outward. It's, which is not a new idea, right? It's like, what's the purpose of the organization? To create and keep a customer. And like that, and I don't know if those management books have been written yet. So maybe, I'm one of who knows how many that are trying to write them. What does the system force people to pay attention to daily is a question. It's almost like quarters, months, weeks, days. It's going to be by minutes. And maybe that's why some really successful CEOs that are getting all the business, they measure their time by minutes, their meetings by minutes. Time is going to be more valuable. Minutes are, it's all going to shrink. It's like we're not even going to measure companies by quarter. We're going to measure companies by day. And we're going to measure success by the minute. And the most successful entrepreneurs and team members are going to be that scrupulous about how they use their time. And the workdays might even shrink like massively. The work day might change. The 5 day work week. I'm not the first to say that, but it won't exist. It'll be completely different. It's like everybody puts in their 2 days at the organization and the rest of the time is on their own thing. And then the question is, do organizations even exist in the future? Well, it doesn't matter right now, but it's helpful to think about that in the sense of figuring out what organizations need to do today based on where customers are at, based on where society's at, based on where employees are at, people are at in their employ, in their career, in their future thinking uh, around all that. Psychological safety becomes much more important. Anyway, I'm done. Thanks for listening.